We're bringing Niobe to the Royal Opera House because it was an opera that I saw at a festival, the Schwetzingen Festival, a couple of years ago, and I was just so taken with it and felt that it was really something that a larger public ought to be able to see. And the public at Covent Garden has certainly not seen an opera like this in many, many years, and it's something that really hit me. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic when I first saw it and thought this is an experience that I would like to share.
When I saw this music, I was absolutely shocked about the beauty and the great shape of this opera.
It's an opera with a really interesting story, quite a strange story, as most Baroque operas are, of course, very complicated, all sorts of characters, lots of subplots going on. But it is actually quite easy to follow how they all interweave and their lives are drawn together. Until the final devastating bit, where the bit Niobe is famous for, being, having all her children struck dead.
Well, the principal source of the story is one of the Metamorphoses of Ovid. These mythical stories in which human beings are transformed and which relate to human experience in a very direct way.
Well, Ovid tells the story of Niobe in the Metamorphoses. His great poem, wonderful, huge cycle of stories, one of the richest deposits of stories that we have. And he tells it in a very particular place, which is in Book 6, where there are the worst revenges taken by the gods and goddesses on mortals who fail to show them proper respect. And these are some of the cruelest stories. And Niobe is probably one of the cruelest, one of the most tragic, because she is a figure of a mother who loses all her children. And so she passes into general legend as a figure of mourning, as the bereft, someone bereft of the deepest and most cherished aspects of her life, her 14 sons and daughters.
The moral of this story is it's a caution against arrogance. Okay, the opera begins with Anfione, the king, tired of the cares of the world, handing over the reins of power to his queen, Niobe. But this rather goes to her head, and she becomes excessively arrogant, and she is guilty in the end of insubordination to the gods.
So Anfione in Niobe by Stephanie is a bit weak character. He's looking for spiritual development. He is sensitive king, looking for harmony.
She loses her 7 sons, but she still persists in her attitude, and so her 7 daughters also are slain. And eventually, her insubordination, her arrogance, leads to her being turned into stone. And it's this turning into stone which is the metamorphosis which Ovid captures in Book 6 of his work. And this is the most spine-chilling part of the opera, as you can imagine. And of course it comes very close to the end. So in a sense the structure of the opera works towards this tremendous climax. All that follows is a kind of chorus celebrating the arrival of a new leader, because Niobe is no more.
When I first saw this opera staged in Schwetzingen, it was on a much smaller stage. Schwetzingen is a delightful sort of stately home setting. That's where they have their festival. And part of the set was literally the physical wall of the theatre with a lovely prospect of the garden through the glass doors. So that was clearly something that we couldn't actually bring to Covent Garden. So we've done a substantial redesign. But it's still essentially what we saw in Schwetzingen. Beautiful costumes, very, very lovely costumes. It's a dramatic staging. There's a certain amount of dance involved. It's very eye-catching as well as incredibly ear-catching. I mean, what was the greatest experience of hearing it in Schwetzingen, and the strongest memory is of the fantastic music making with Thomas Hengelbrock and his wonderful period orchestra. The Balthasar Neumann ensemble who are coming to Covent Garden. So we're going to get that full musical experience. Comparing it to what people know already, if you like Handel, you will certainly be surprised that Stefani was writing before Handel, and in fact he was one of the important influences on Handel's music.
The operas of Stefani's period are not performed very often these days. I think there are lots of reasons for this, but essentially the 20th century saw a revival of interest in Baroque opera, but beginning at the end. So Handel.
There are so many operas, in the history of opera, so many have been written. And so many fall through the cracks. And Niobe, I think, well, the complete works of Stefani really have pretty well disappeared. Not because they weren't fantastic works, but because there was simply so much new opera being written all the time.
When he died, it was in London that somebody wrote, with Agostino Stefani, the greatest composer ever lived, he died. The greatest composer in the world died. So he was well estimated in his time. He was quite famous.
His operas, of course, were all written for German courts. So when you start comparing Stefani with, say, Alessandro Scarlatti or Vivaldi, you're not really comparing like with like. Court opera is a different animal from the public theatre in Venice. I would say that he was writing for a more sophisticated audience.
In Niobe, you do get an opportunity to hear some pretty wonderful vocal writing. And of course, there are some really specialist singers of a type that you wouldn't hear perhaps in many operas. There are 3 countertenors, and this extraordinary male soprano in the role of Anfione.
When I was 10, 12, I studied in music school. I was able to sing higher than piccolo flute.
We do enjoy having the opportunity to do Baroque opera here from time to time. Particularly, it means also that we can bring in a period instrument orchestra, which is really, really great to hear that special sound.
When I took first time the score, I thought, oh, it's very strange. It's so short arias without da capo and strange harmony. And after I just fall in love with this music. It's great, fantastic, rich, simple, natural.
An aria will typically last a couple of minutes, not necessarily much more. A big one might last 5.
It was so touching. The people has been nearly in tears. They has been shocked. They has been shocked by the beauty and the deepness of this music. Even in the first rehearsal, there was silence after the first reading, completely silent, and the people was, what incredible music is this? So it's something very, very special, and I can recommend it very much to come.